The space station was alive with activity as the ship's hum echoed through the long corridors. Human soldiers, tired from long missions, walked through the bustling halls, their faces exhausted but determined. Among them was Private First Class Michael Rivers, a young soldier who had just completed his latest task. The mission had been grueling, and now, all Michael wanted was a moment of peace. He'd spent days in zero gravity, fighting off alien threats, and now he craved something simple: a seat in the station's crowded lounge, some food, and a few minutes of rest. As Michael entered the lounge, he felt the usual buzz of conversation, the clinking of plates, and the hum of machinery. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was comfortable enough for soldiers like him who didn't expect luxury. The chairs were basic but functional, and the food was edible, at least enough to keep them going. Michael scanned the room for an empty seat. He spotted one by the window, a small table overlooking the dark expanse of space. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He made his way toward the seat, but as he got closer, a man in a uniform stepped in his path. Michael halted, confused. The officer, a senior officer judging by the insignia on his shoulder, looked at him with a stern expression. "This seat is reserved," the officer said, his voice flat and dismissive. Michael blinked, unsure of what to make of the situation. "Reserved," he repeated, his voice rising slightly with the surprise. The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave Michael a once-over, his eyes narrowing, almost as if he were assessing the soldier's worth. After a long pause, the officer motioned toward a different seat across the room. "That one's free," he said, not bothering to explain further. Michael, puzzled, looked around. The lounge was full, but there were still a few seats left. They weren't the most desirable spots, closer to the doors, near the kitchens, or tucked into the far corners of the room. But there were seats. Why, then, was this one being denied? "I'm tired, sir," Michael said. "I've been on a long mission, and all I need is a seat." He was trying to remain polite, but frustration was beginning to creep into his tone. It didn't make sense. Why deny him something so simple? The officer's eyes flashed with something unreadable, a look that sent a cold chill through Michael's spine. "You're not supposed to sit here," the officer said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. The officer didn't even glance at the available seats Michael had been pointed to earlier. Instead, he just turned and walked away without another word, his boots clicking sharply against the floor. Michael stood frozen for a moment, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was something strange about the encounter. The officer's coldness, the way he dismissed Michael without explanation. It didn't sit right. Michael was used to military discipline, used to following orders and understanding chain of command. But this felt different. Something about the officer's tone had unsettled him. Michael was no longer sure if he was simply being dismissed because of his rank, or if there was something more at play. As the officer walked away, Michael felt the eyes of everyone in the room shift toward him. Some soldiers looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't seen anything, while others kept their gazes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and fear. It wasn't uncommon for soldiers to be treated harshly by higher-ranking officers, but this was different. The way everyone was acting, like they were avoiding looking at him, like they knew something he didn't, made his skin crawl. Without thinking, Michael moved to one of the far corners of the room, choosing a seat near the window. He felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him as he sat down, but no one spoke. The low murmur of conversation resumed, but it wasn't the usual chatter of soldiers unwinding after a mission. There was an uncomfortable silence in the air, a tension that was hard to ignore. Michael tried to brush it off. Maybe he was reading too much into the situation. Maybe it was just the stress of the mission, the exhaustion weighing on him. He forced himself to take a deep breath and focus on the view outside the station. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before him, stars twinkling like distant promises. He used to find peace in the beauty of space, the quiet majesty of it all. But today, it only seemed to amplify the unease gnawing at him. As he sat there, picking at his food. A strange thought crossed his mind. What if the officer's behavior wasn't personal? What if it was something bigger? Michael had been part of the military long enough to know that sometimes things didn't make sense, not right away. There were layers to the way things worked in the military, layers that could easily be hidden from lower-ranking soldiers like himself. But there was something about this incident, something about the officer's coldness, that made Michael feel like he was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. After a few minutes, another soldier walked past him. It was Sergeant Thompson, a seasoned officer who had been part of several missions with Michael. Thompson was a no-nonsense type of guy, tough but fair. Michael had always respected him. "Hey, Thompson," Michael said, trying to keep his voice casual, though his unease was evident. "Do you know what that was about?" "The officer, the seat. Why was I denied that spot?" Sergeant Thompson glanced over at him with a quick, nervous look before lowering his voice. "It's not about the seat, Mike," he said quietly. "It's about something much bigger than that. Trust me, you're better off just letting it go." Michael stared at him, puzzled. "What do you mean? What's going on here? Why is everyone acting so strange?" Thompson looked around quickly, as if making sure no one was listening, and then lowered his voice even further. "Look, kid, there are things happening here, things you don't understand. I can't explain it, but you need to be careful. Stay out of it." With that, Thompson turned and walked away, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. What was going on? The entire situation felt off, and now even his fellow soldiers were acting like there was something he didn't know. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been involved in something that went far beyond the simple act of being denied a seat. He sat there, staring out at the stars, lost in thought. Something wasn't right. Something big was happening, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Michael was at the center of it. But what was it? Why had he been singled out, and why did everyone seem to be avoiding him? The question swirled in his mind, unanswered and haunting. Michael knew one thing for certain. The truth was out there, and it was only a matter of time before he uncovered it. But little did he know, the journey ahead would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The days after the incident at the lounge felt strange to Michael. His mind kept returning to the officer's cold dismissal, the way he had been treated like an outsider in his own space. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, a feeling that something deeper was happening, something he wasn't being told. He tried to focus on his work, to put the unsettling encounter behind him. But the silence that followed him around the station was deafening. No one spoke to him, not even in passing. Every time he tried to engage with someone, they would quickly turn away, as if avoiding his gaze. It was as if he were a ghost walking through a world that no longer wanted him. The following morning, Michael was back in his assigned duties, running routine checks on the ship's systems. It was mind-numbing work, but it kept him busy, and right now, keeping busy was the only thing that kept his mind from spinning out of control. As he worked, his thoughts returned to Sergeant Thompson's strange warning. "Stay out of it," Thompson had said, his voice laced with a fear that was hard to ignore. What was going on? What did he mean by that? As Michael moved through the narrow hallways of the station, he couldn't help but notice the whispers that seemed to follow him. Whenever he turned a corner, conversations would abruptly stop. He was no fool. He knew something was wrong. But what was it? Was it just the tension of military life, or was there something deeper that no one was willing to tell him? Later that afternoon, Michael was called to the officer's deck for a routine debriefing. The request came from Lieutenant Harper, a strict but fair officer who had overseen many of his missions. Michael was relieved to finally get some direct orders, hoping that the formality of the meeting would offer a sense of normalcy. When he arrived at the officer's deck, he was greeted by Harper, who seemed unusually tense. "Private Rivers," Harper said, his voice flat, "I need you to report on the recent mission. Any abnormalities, anything out of the ordinary." Michael began to speak, recounting the mission's details. But as he spoke, he noticed something odd. Lieutenant Harper was barely paying attention. His gaze kept flicking to the door, his posture stiff and guarded. There was a noticeable tension in the air, something Michael had never felt during a debriefing before. "Lieutenant, is everything all right?" Michael asked, his voice careful. Harper's eyes shot to him, then quickly darted away. For a moment, Michael could have sworn he saw a flicker of fear in the officer's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Just finish your report, Rivers," Harper said, his voice cold. "Then you're dismissed." Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't normal. Harper had always been professional, even when times were tough. But today, something was off. Michael didn't push any further, finishing the report and leaving the room. But as he stepped out into the hallway, he noticed something strange. There were no other officers around. It was unusually quiet for the time of day. The silence was deafening, like the entire station was holding its breath. Michael felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He had the distinct feeling that something was happening behind the scenes, something he wasn't supposed to see, something that was being kept from him. As Michael moved through the halls, he passed by a small group of soldiers standing by the elevator. When they saw him, they immediately went silent. Their eyes shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word. Michael could feel their gaze lingering on him, and he knew without a doubt that they were talking about him, whispering things he wasn't meant to hear. His instincts told him that whatever was going on, he had become a part of it, whether he wanted to be or not. He decided to follow his gut. Something had to be going on, and if no one was going to tell him, then he would have to find out for himself. Michael didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew he had no choice but to keep moving forward. The next day, Michael took the first step. He decided to go to the restricted area of the station, a place that was off-limits to most of the crew. It was rumored to hold valuable military data, classified files, and sometimes even secret experiments. Getting in there without clearance was risky, but Michael felt he had no other option. He knew the station's layout well. He'd been here long enough to understand the security systems and patrol patterns. He waited until the middle of the night, when most of the officers would be on shift or asleep. Quietly, he slipped through the halls, moving like a shadow in the dark. As he approached the restricted area, he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Every step was more dangerous than the last, but the nagging feeling that something was wrong kept pushing him forward. When he reached the door to the restricted section, Michael saw the guard posted outside, a tall man with a rifle slung across his chest. Michael's stomach tightened, but he kept his cool. He couldn't afford to be seen. Slowly, he crept around the corner, searching for a way to get past the guard without being noticed. Then he spotted it. A small access panel by the wall, just out of the guard's sight. If he could hack into it, he could unlock the door and slip inside unnoticed. He moved quickly, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out his security tool, a small device used to hack into the station's systems. He plugged it into the access panel, and after a few tense moments, the panel blinked green. The door slid open quietly, and Michael slipped inside. What he found in the restricted section was nothing like what he had expected. Rows of data terminals were lined up, their screens filled with streams of encrypted information. But it wasn't the data that caught his attention. It was the room's contents. In the center was a large sealed container. The faint hum of power radiated from it, and Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as he approached. The container was labeled Project Ascended. His hands trembled as he ran his fingers over the label. What was this? Why was it hidden here, in the most secure part of the station? Before he could investigate further, he heard footsteps approaching. Panic surged through him. He quickly turned, sprinting down the hallway, his heart racing as he fled back to the safety of his quarters. As he lay in his bed that night, his mind raced with what he had just discovered. The Project Ascended container was something bigger than he could comprehend. What was inside it? Why had it been kept so secret? And why did the officer's strange behavior and the cold treatment he received seemed to tie into this. Michael knew that he had just uncovered the tip of the iceberg. He wasn't sure what it all meant, but he knew one thing for sure. He was getting closer to the truth, and it was something no one wanted him to know. And as he drifted off to sleep, a new feeling settled in his chest. Determination. Whatever the truth was, Michael Rivers wasn't going to back down. The next few days felt like a blur to Michael. His mind was still reeling from the night he had snuck into the restricted area, finding the mysterious Project Descendant container. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of the sealed, humming container filled his thoughts. He couldn't stop wondering what was inside. What was so important about this project that it needed to be hidden away in the deepest recesses of the station? Why was the entire crew acting like they knew something he didn't? Michael knew he was getting closer to something big, but every time he tried to piece the puzzle together, the pieces slipped through his fingers. Despite the overwhelming urge to find answers, Michael knew he had to be careful. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous things seemed to get. The officers' behavior, the secrecy surrounding certain parts of the station. It was clear now that he had stumbled into something that wasn't meant for him to see. But he couldn't let it go. He had to know the truth. The tension in the station had only grown since the incident with the officer denying him the seat. Every day, he felt more and more like a pariah, as though everyone around him was silently judging him, or maybe even conspiring against him. No one would look him in the eye anymore, and whispers followed him wherever he went. The sense of isolation was growing, but Michael couldn't focus on that now. He had a mission. He had to uncover what Project Descendant was, and he had to do it quickly before someone realized he was getting too close. He knew he couldn't do it alone. The first person who came to mind was Sergeant Thompson. Thompson had warned him, yes, but there was something in his warning that Michael couldn't ignore. Thompson knew more than he was letting on, and Michael needed answers. He had to take the risk and speak to him again. That evening, after the rest of the crew had gone to their duties or retired for the night, Michael made his way to Thompson's quarters. He had always respected the man, admired his no-nonsense attitude, and his ability to stay calm under pressure. But now, Michael wasn't sure if Thompson was still someone he could trust. There were too many unanswered questions, but at this point, it was his only lead. When Michael reached the door to Thompson's quarters, he hesitated for a moment before knocking. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Thompson appeared in the doorway, looking as tired as ever. His face softened when he saw who it was. "Rivers," Thompson said, his tone cautious. "What's going on? This isn't exactly a good time." Michael stepped forward, lowering his voice. "I need to talk to you. It's important. It's about the project. The one I found in the restricted section. Project Descendant. What is it? What's really going on here?" Thompson's eyes flickered with something like fear, but he quickly masked it, stepping back to let Michael in. "Come inside," he muttered. "We need to keep this quiet. Sit down." Michael entered the small, dimly lit room, closing the door behind him. He took a seat on the chair near the desk, where Thompson had placed a few scattered papers. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. "I didn't want you to get involved, Rivers," Thompson said finally, his voice low. "But now that you've seen it, there's no going back." Michael leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What do you mean? What is Project Descendant? Why is it hidden? And why is everyone acting like I don't belong here?" Thompson sighed deeply, running a hand through his short, graying hair. "You don't belong here, Rivers. At least, not the way you think you do. You were never meant to be part of the crew. You've been a pawn in something much bigger." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "A pawn? What are you talking about?" Thompson stood and paced across the room, his face tense with the weight of the words he was about to say. "Project Descendant is. It's not just a research project. It's not some simple military operation. It's about power, human power, the kind we've never seen before. The project was designed to unlock the potential of our species. And you, Rivers, are at the center of it. Michael blinked, trying to process what Thompson was saying. Me? Why me? Thompson stopped pacing and turned to face him, his eyes filled with an emotion Michael couldn't quite identify. Because you're special, Rivers. You've always been special. You just don't know it yet. You were selected. The mission you've been on, the one you thought was just another routine patrol, it was all part of the plan. They've been testing you, monitoring you for years, waiting for you to finally unlock your potential. Michael's mind raced. Testing me? What do you mean? Thompson's gaze darkened. The higher-ups, they'd been conducting experiments, trying to awaken something within the human genome. Something that was buried, dormant, hidden. But they weren't sure if it would work. Until now. The fact that you survived the last mission, the way you reacted to the alien threat, that's what confirmed it. You've got something inside you, something that makes you more than just human. You're the result of Project Ascendant, whether you know it or not. Michael felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. His entire world was being turned upside down. You're saying I'm part of some experiment. That I'm different. Thompson nodded slowly. Exactly. You've been living among the other soldiers, thinking you were just another recruit, just another member of the team. But the truth is, you've been marked. You were chosen because they believed you had what it takes. You've got abilities they've been looking for, powers they've been trying to unlock in human DNA. They've been keeping tabs on you for years, ever since you first enlisted. Michael's mind spun as he tried to digest everything Thompson had just told him. He had always known there was something unique about the missions he was sent on, but he never suspected it had anything to do with his own DNA. The idea that he had been unknowingly part of an experiment was beyond comprehension. What now? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What do I do with this knowledge? What's the next step? Thompson looked at him gravely. There's a reason they denied you that seat, Rivers. It wasn't because you weren't important. It was because they were testing you. They wanted to see how you'd react when you were pushed to the edge. And now that you know the truth, they won't stop until they have control over you, until they use you for whatever their plan is. You have two choices: fight back and risk everything, or let them control you. But make no mistake, you're in this whether you like it or not. Michael sat back in his chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. For the first time, he felt like the world around him was crumbling, revealing a hidden truth he never could have imagined. The truth about himself, the truth about the station, and the truth about what was really going on. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just fighting for humanity's survival. He was the key to something far bigger, something that could change everything. And now, with the knowledge Thompson had given him, Michael had to decide if he was willing to embrace it, or if he would fight back and risk everything he had ever known. Michael barely slept that night. His mind kept replaying everything Sergeant Thompson had told him, how he was the key to something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. The truth was more than he had been prepared for. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and yet it also stirred something inside him. He had always felt like there was more to his life than just being another soldier. But now that he knew the truth, it was hard to make sense of it all. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a part of something far more dangerous than any mission he had ever been on. The next day, he tried to act normal, though the tension in his chest was almost unbearable. Everywhere he went, he could feel the weight of the knowledge pressing down on him. And every time he looked at a fellow soldier, he couldn't help but wonder if they knew what was really going on. Were they all part of this experiment? Or was it just him? The thought made his stomach turn. Michael had spent years following orders, doing his part to protect humanity from alien threats, never questioning the reasons behind his missions. But now, with the knowledge of what he was, everything had changed. The stakes were higher. If Project Ascendant was real, then everything Michael had been doing, Everything he had thought was his purpose had been part of a much larger plan, one he had never been told about. The truth was like a shadow hanging over him, following him wherever he went. He needed answers, more than the cryptic words Thompson had offered. And if anyone could provide them, it was the one person who had the most access to the truth, Lieutenant Harper. Michael knew that Harper was tied to the project in some way. The cold behavior, the secrecy, it all pointed to someone who knew more than he let on. He wasn't sure if Harper would be willing to talk, but after everything that had happened, Michael knew he had no other choice. He had to confront him. That evening, Michael found himself outside Harper's office, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The soft sound echoed down the hall, and within moments, the door slid open, revealing Lieutenant Harper standing in the doorway, his face expressionless as usual. "Private Rivers," Harper said, his voice curt. "What's the matter? This isn't a social call." "I need to talk to you," Michael said, his voice firm. "It's about Project Ascendant. I know you're involved, and I need answers." Harper stiffened at the mention of the project, his eyes narrowing slightly. He glanced around the hallway before stepping back, allowing Michael to enter. "This is highly classified, Rivers," he said, his voice low. "You shouldn't be asking about this. Do you understand?" "I don't care about classification anymore, sir," Michael shot back. "I want the truth. What is Project Ascendant? Why am I involved? What have you done to me?" Harper's gaze flickered with something like regret, but it disappeared quickly. He motioned for Michael to sit down, and they both took their seats at the small desk in the corner of the room. "You really don't understand, do you?" Harper said, his voice quiet. "You were chosen, Rivers, not just because of your abilities, not just because you survived missions that others didn't. You were chosen because of what you are, what you've always been. We needed someone with your potential." Michael stared at him, the confusion and frustration mounting. "What do you mean? What am I? What's the truth?" Harper took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Michael's. Project Ascendant wasn't just about testing soldiers. It wasn't just about creating the perfect warrior. It was about pushing the boundaries of human evolution. A long time ago, scientists discovered a hidden strand of DNA that could unlock abilities far beyond what we thought was possible. We've been experimenting with it for years, trying to harness that power, trying to make humanity more. And you, Michael, you were the result of that experiment. Michael's mind was spinning. "So, I'm not normal. I'm just some kind of lab experiment." Harper looked at him gravely, his eyes hardening. "You were never meant to know. You were never meant to understand the full extent of what you are. You were supposed to be part of the system, part of the greater machine, without question. But now that you've uncovered the truth, there's no going back." Michael's chest tightened as the realization hit him. Everything he thought he knew about himself was a lie. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just fighting for the safety of humanity. He was a weapon, created by a system that had no regard for the individual lives it toyed with. He had been groomed, tested, and molded for something bigger than he could have imagined. "Why me?" Michael whispered. "Why did you choose me? What makes me different?" Harper's eyes softened, just slightly. "It's not just about being different. It's about your potential. The experiments, the testing, it was all leading up to you. You're the one who will carry us into the next stage of human evolution. But that's not something we can control. That's something you have to decide for yourself." Michael felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. The weight of his choices, of what was at stake, was almost too much to bear. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What do I do with all of this?" Harper leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "That's up to you, Michael. You've already started down this path. The question is whether you will continue to follow the orders you've been given, or whether you will choose your own path." For the first time, Michael felt the full weight of his own potential. The power, the abilities he had never fully understood, the strange incidents he had experienced in battle, They all made sense now. He wasn't just a soldier. He was something more, something that could change the world. But with that power came a responsibility that Michael wasn't sure he was ready to bear. And if he chose to embrace it, everything in his life would change. "I need time to think," Michael said, standing up abruptly. His mind was racing, and he had to get away from the conversation, away from Harper. He needed space to process everything he had just learned. "I need to figure this out." Harper nodded, his expression hardening once again. "Take all the time you need, Rivers. But remember, the clock is ticking. You can't stay in the dark forever. The decisions you make now will shape the future, for better or for worse." As Michael turned to leave, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. What kind of future awaited him now? He had always believed he was fighting for something bigger than himself, but now it seemed the fight was against his own past. He had been a pawn in someone else's game, but now, for the first time, he had the chance to control his own fate. He didn't know what path he would take, but one thing was certain: whatever decision he made, it would change everything. And the world would never be the same again. The days that followed were a blur. Michael's mind was consumed by the revelations he had uncovered. Every moment, every decision seemed to carry weight, the burden of knowing the truth about Project Descendant pressing down on him like a storm cloud. He had always thought of himself as a soldier, someone who followed orders, who did his duty for the greater good of humanity. But now he wasn't so sure. He was no longer just a soldier. He was the key to something much bigger than himself, and with that came a responsibility he wasn't sure he could handle. What was he supposed to do with the power, the potential that had been buried inside him all these years? The idea that he had been part of an experiment, that he had been chosen because of his DNA, everything he had believed in seemed to be slipping away. The more he thought about it, the more Michael realized how alone he was. The soldiers who once called him a brother were now distant, treating him like an outsider. No one spoke to him, no one acknowledged him. And then there was the tension. The whispers that seemed to follow him wherever he went. It wasn't just the crew that was avoiding him. It was like the entire station had turned its back on him. But none of that mattered now. Michael had bigger things to focus on. It was late one evening when he made his decision. He couldn't stay in the dark, pretending everything was normal. He couldn't let the higher-ups control his life anymore. He had to know the full truth. And to do that, he would have to confront the project head-on. But he wouldn't go alone. The first person Michael turned to was Sergeant Thompson. Thompson had been the one to warn him, to give him a glimpse of the truth. If anyone could help him navigate this mess, it was Thompson. He knew the risks, he understood the dangers, and most importantly, he had always been a man who knew when to fight back. Michael found Thompson in the barracks, sitting alone at a table, cleaning his weapon in the dim light. His eyes met Michael's as he walked in, and for the first time in days, Michael saw something familiar, something that reminded him of the man he once respected. "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" Thompson said, his voice low and gravelly. Michael nodded. "I can't keep running from this. I need to know everything. What Project Descendant is, what they've done to me, and what they plan to do. I can't keep pretending like nothing is happening." Thompson sighed, setting his weapon down on the table. He looked at Michael carefully, as though weighing the decision in his own mind. "You're not going to like what you find," he warned. "There's a lot more to this than just a military experiment. The people behind Project Descendant, they're dangerous, Michael. They'll do whatever it takes to keep their secrets, and they won't hesitate to destroy anyone who gets in their way." Michael didn't flinch. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes, I'll find out the truth. I have to." Thompson stood, his face hardening. "All right. Then we do this carefully. We can't just waltz into their headquarters. But I know a way to get to the heart of Project Descendant. We'll need to access the central databanks, where everything is stored. The data, the research, the details on every subject involved. If we can get in there, We'll have everything we need. Michael felt the weight of the decision settling heavily on his shoulders. They were about to do something dangerous, something that could cost them everything. But the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. There was no other way. He couldn't let them control his fate anymore. The plan was simple. Infiltrate the main facility, hack into the central systems, and retrieve everything they could about Project Descendant. But the reality was far more complicated. The station's security systems were tight, and the personnel guarding it were trained to stop anyone who tried to get past them. Thompson was right. It would be risky. But Michael had always believed in the strength of teamwork. And now, with Thompson by his side, he had hope that they could pull it off. They spent the next few days preparing, gathering equipment, and learning everything they could about the station's security protocols. Every moment felt like a step closer to the truth, and yet Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone knew what they were planning. But they pushed that fear aside, knowing that there was no turning back now. The night they decided to make their move, Michael couldn't sleep. The plan was set, the route was mapped, and the time had come. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his body on high alert. As he waited for Thompson to arrive, he found himself replaying everything in his mind. The warnings, the cryptic conversations, the way the officers had treated him like a stranger. All of it led to this moment. When Thompson arrived at his quarters, he was ready. "Let's go," he said quietly, his eyes sharp and focused. Together, they moved through the shadows of the station, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection. Every step was measured. Every corner they turned carefully planned. The air was thick with tension as they crept closer to the central databanks, the heart of Project Descendant. But just as they neared the entrance, something went wrong. A guard stepped into view, and Michael's heart skipped a beat. The man was standing just a few feet away, his back to them, scanning the area. It was only a matter of time before he would turn around and spot them. Without thinking, Michael grabbed Thompson's arm and pulled him back into the shadows. They pressed themselves against the cold wall, holding their breath as the guard's footsteps grew louder. Michael's mind raced. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. The guard stopped, and for a moment, it felt like time had frozen. Then, as if by sheer luck, the guard turned and walked in the opposite direction. Michael and Thompson exchanged a look of silent relief. They had narrowly avoided disaster, but they knew it wouldn't be the last close call. They made it to the entrance without further incident, but the hardest part was still to come. They had to breach the security systems. Thompson pulled out a small device and began hacking into the access panel. The seconds felt like hours as Michael stood guard, keeping an eye out for any sign of trouble. Finally, with a soft click, the door slid open. They were in. The central databanks were vast, rows upon rows of terminals, each filled with encrypted data. Michael could feel the weight of what they were about to uncover. Everything. All the answers they needed were within reach. As Thompson quickly accessed the systems, Michael stood guard, his heart pounding in his chest. But as Thompson worked, a voice crackled over the intercom, and Michael froze. Unauthorized access detected. Security lockdown in progress. Repeat, security lockdown in progress. The warning echoed through the halls, and Michael's blood ran cold. The alarms blared to life, their shrill sound filling the station. They were out of time. Thompson's face went pale. "We've been compromised." Michael grabbed his arm. "We need to move. Now." They bolted out of the room, racing down the corridor, the sound of heavy footsteps chasing them from behind. They had just uncovered the truth, but at what cost? The chase was on, and the truth they had sought was now more dangerous than ever.